He ruled Chicago's underworld with an iron fist, but a cowardly bullet left him trapped inside his own body. Paralyzed, bitter, and terrifyingly cruel, he drove away every professional caretaker. No one dared approach the broken king. Until a tired nursing student walked into his penthouse with a bowl of soup. The snow was falling heavily over the Gold Coast of Chicago, blanketing the city in a deceptive quiet. High above the frozen streets inside a sprawling $30 million penthouse on Astor Street, the silence was anything but peaceful. It was suffocating, heavy. It was the silence of a dying empire. Dominic Kang sat in a motorized, custom-built medical chair staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city he used to own. 6 months ago, Dominic was untouchable. He was the head of the largest organized crime syndicate in the Midwest, a man whose mere whisper could halt shipments at the port or empty out entire nightclubs. He was ruthless, calculating, and possessed a chilling charisma that demanded absolute loyalty. But then came the ambush on Lower Wacker Drive. It was supposed to be a standard meeting, but a rival faction had purchased the loyalty of someone on his security detail. The blacked-out SUV was torn apart by automatic gunfire. Dominic survived, but a single stray bullet had lodged itself precariously in his cervical spine. Dr. Aris Mitchell at Northwestern Memorial Hospital had delivered the grim prognosis, a C4 incomplete spinal cord injury. Dominic was paralyzed from the neck down. His mind was as sharp and dangerous as ever, but his body was a useless prison. With his physical weakness came a profound toxic bitterness. The man who once commanded thousands was now forced to rely on strangers to wipe his mouth and adjust his pillows. In retaliation against his own helplessness, Dominic became an absolute nightmare. He couldn't throw punches anymore, so he used the only weapons he had, left: his wealth, his power, and his vicious tongue. He fired top-tier registered nurses by the dozens. When they tried to feed him, he would spit the food back in their faces, hurling insults so venomous that seasoned trauma professionals left the Astor Street penthouse in tears. He starved himself out of sheer spite, his sharp cheekbones hollowing out his dark, piercing eyes, sinking deeper into his skull. He was daring his body to give out completely. Downstairs in the lavish kitchen, Brenda Jackson was crying silently over a marble countertop. Brenda had been the head housekeeper for the penthouse for 5 years. She knew who Dominic was, and she knew the terrifying men who guarded the front doors, men like Victor Rossi, Dominic's current acting underboss, who walked around with cold eyes and a holstered weapon under his tailored suits. Brenda kept her head down, cleaned the blood out of the carpets when necessary, and collected a massive paycheck that was keeping her family afloat. But today, Victor had delivered an ultimatum. "The boss hasn't eaten in 3 days, Victor had said, leaning against the refrigerator, his voice completely devoid of warmth. "The last nurse quit this morning. If he starves to death, Brenda, this whole operation falls apart. And if it falls apart, I'm cleaning house. Everyone who was here during his decline goes away. Find a way to get food in him, or I'll find someone else who will. You understand." Brenda understood perfectly. It wasn't just a threat of unemployment. It was a threat to her life. She stood there trembling, holding a silver tray with a steaming bowl of rich, high-calorie beef consommé. She had tried twice already. The first time Dominic had screamed at her to get out. The second time, he had suddenly jerked his head forward, intentionally knocking the spoon from her hand and splashing the hot broth onto her apron. "Mom?" Brenda jumped, turning to see her daughter standing in the kitchen doorway. Nia Jackson was 22, a senior nursing student at Loyola University, and a force of nature. Where Brenda was subservient and anxious, Nia was grounded, fiercely intelligent, and possessed a quiet, unshakable strength. She was beautiful, with deep, glowing brown skin, dark curls pulled back into a messy bun, and a tired but sharp gaze. She had just finished a brutal 12-hour clinical rotation at Mercy Hospital and had stopped by to drop off some paperwork for her mother. "Nia, what are you doing here?" Brenda hurriedly wiped her tears, but it was too late. Nia's eyes narrowed, taking in her mother's shaking hands and the stained apron. "Who did that? Did one of those goons in the hallway touch you?" No, keep your voice down," Brenda hissed, terrified. She pulled her daughter deeper into the kitchen. "It's Mr. Kang. He's in a bad place, Nia. He won't eat. And Victor said if I can't feed him, we're all out on the street. Or worse." Nia looked at the silver tray, then at her mother. She knew exactly what worse meant in this environment. She had always hated that her mother worked for the mob, but the money had paid off the crippling debts left behind after Nia's father passed away. It was a devil's bargain, and the devil was finally collecting. "He spits it at you," Nia asked, her voice dangerously calm. "He's angry, baby. He's trapped in that chair," Brenda pleaded. "He's lost his pride." "That doesn't give him the right to abuse you," Nia said flatly. She stepped forward, untying the stained apron from her mother's waist and wrapping it around her own scrubs. She picked up the silver tray. "Nia, what are you doing? You can't go in there. He'll destroy you." Brenda reached out, panic seizing her chest. "I deal with stubborn, combative patients every day in the neurotrauma ward. Mom," Nia said, her posture perfectly straight. "A paralyzed mob boss is just a patient throwing a temper tantrum. Go sit down. I'll handle Mr. Kang." Before Brenda could stop her, Nia pushed through the swinging kitchen doors and marched toward the master suite, the silver tray balanced perfectly in her hands. She wasn't afraid of the men in the hallway. She wasn't afraid of the guns. She was a black woman who had fought tooth and nail for every opportunity she had in life, and she refused to let a broken, miserable man terrorize her mother. The air in the master suite was heavy with the scent of expensive sandalwood and the sharp, clinical smell of antiseptic. The room was cast in shadows, illuminated only by the grey winter light bleeding through the windows. In the centre of the room sat Dominic Kang. Even paralyzed, the man radiated a dark, oppressive gravity. He wore a crisp, dark silk shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. His jaw was covered in a rough shadow of stubble, and his black hair was slightly unkempt. When the heavy oak doors clicked shut, Dominic didn't turn his head. He couldn't. But his eyes, dark and vicious, cut to the side, locking onto Nia through the reflection in the glass. "I told the snivelling housekeeper to leave." Dominic's voice was a low, gravelly baritone, rough from lack of use, but dripping with venom. "Get out before I have Victor throw you off the balcony." Nia didn't flinch. She walked calmly across the Persian rug, the soft thud of her sensible nursing shoes the only sound in the room. She approached the front of his wheelchair and set the silver tray down on the mahogany table beside him. "The housekeeper is my mother," Nia said, her voice even resonant and entirely lacking the tremor Dominic was accustomed to hearing. "And she is currently in the kitchen having a panic attack because you decided to act like a spoiled toddler, so you're going to deal with me." Dominic's eyes widened a fraction. For the first time in 6 months, absolute shock momentarily overpowered his rage. No one spoke to him like that. Not before the bullet, and certainly not after. He stared at the young woman standing before him. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't avoiding his gaze. Her dark brown eyes were locked directly onto his, holding a fiery, unwavering challenge. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Dominic sneered, a muscle feathering in his jaw. "I could end your life with a single word." "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Kang," Nia replied smoothly. She pulled up a chair sitting directly in front of him, so she was perfectly at his eye level. She picked up the porcelain bowl and the silver spoon. "You're a very powerful man who is currently incapable of scratching his own nose. Now open your mouth." She scooped up a small amount of the broth and held it toward his lips. Dominic's pride flared into a blinding rage. He jerked his head violently toward her hand, intending to knock the spoon away with his chin, just as he had done to Brenda. But Nia was a trauma nurse. She possessed lightning-fast reflexes. Anticipating the movement, she swiftly pulled the spoon back. Dominic's chin hit empty air, leaving him slightly off balance and breathing heavily. "Are we really going to do this?" Nia asked, her tone shifting from stern to exhausted. I just worked a 12-hour shift pulling glass out of car crash victims. My feet hurt, my back aches, and I have pharmacology flashcards to review. I do not have the time or the patience for a staring contest with a mafia boss. Then leave, he spat. I can't. If I leave your lapdog, Victor fires my mother. And we need this job, Nia said bluntly, offering a raw honesty that completely disarmed him. She didn't dress it up in pity. She didn't pretend to care about his soul. It was a transaction, and she was laying the cards on the table. You're angry. You're grieving the body you lost. I get it. It's unfair, and it's a living hell. But starving yourself to punish the people who are just trying to survive the blast radius of your life, that's not power, Mr. Kang. That's just pathetic. The silence that followed was deafening. The air between them crackled with an intense volatile energy. Dominic stared at her, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling beneath the silk shirt. He searched her face for a trace of fear, a crack in her armor, but he found nothing. He only saw a fierce, radiant dignity. For a man who lived his entire life surrounded by liars, sycophants, and terrified subordinates, Nia Jackson was a violent shock to his system. She was entirely real. Slowly, agonizingly, the tension in Dominic's jaw relaxed. The fiery hatred in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a dark, intense curiosity. He looked at the spoon in her hand, and then back up to her eyes. Soup, he muttered softly. Consommé. Nia corrected her own heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs despite her calm exterior. She lifted the spoon again. This time Dominic didn't flinch. He slightly parted his lips, allowing her to feed him. Nia worked in a methodical, professional rhythm. She didn't rush him, nor did she coddle him. She would gently dab his chin with a linen napkin when a drop escaped her touch, strictly clinical, yet somehow grounding. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the soft clinking of silver against porcelain. As she fed him, Dominic studied her. He noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the proud tilt of her chin, the way her rich skin seemed to glow against the sterile greys of his sick room. He felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest that had absolutely nothing to do with his spinal injury. It was a spark. A dangerous, intoxicating spark of life in a man who had considered himself already dead. What is your name? He asked quietly as she scraped the bottom of the bowl. Nia, she said, setting the bowl down. Nia, he repeated. The name felt heavy and grounded on his tongue. You aren't afraid of me, Nia. I reserve my fear for things that matter, Mr. Kang, she replied, standing up and smoothing down her scrubs. Like my pharmacology exams. Before Dominic could respond, the heavy oak doors swung open. Victor Rossi stood in the doorway, flanked by two massive enforcers. Victor's eyes darted from Dominic to the empty bowl on the silver tray, and then finally settled on Nia. A flash of genuine surprise followed by something dark and calculating crossed his face. Well, Victor said, a slick practice smile stretching across his lips. It seems we finally found a nurse the boss likes. Nia felt a sudden icy chill crawl up her spine. The way Victor looked at her wasn't with gratitude. It was an assessment. He was looking at her like she was a loose thread in a sweater he was trying to unravel. Dominic caught the look too. Even Paralyzed, the alpha predator inside him immediately sensed a threat. His eyes narrowed, pinning Victor to the doorway. She is not a nurse, Victor. She is Brenda's daughter. Dominic commanded, his voice suddenly roaring back to its full terrifying authority, making Victor flinch. And she is now my personal exclusive caretaker. If anyone in this organization so much as looks at her sideways, I don't care if I have to drag myself across this floor with my teeth, I will rip their throat out. Are we clear? Victor's smile faltered, his eyes dropping in a show of subservience that felt entirely fake. Crystal clear, boss. As Victor retreated, shutting the door behind him, Nia looked down at Dominic. The dynamics of the room had just violently shifted. She had walked in to save her mother's job, but looking into Dominic Kang's dark, fiercely protective eyes, Nia realized she had just accidentally walked directly into the center of a Mafia war, and the paralyzed king on the throne had just made her his queen on the chessboard. The following months blurred into a grueling high-stakes routine. Nia officially moved into the Astor Street penthouse, negotiating a salary that paid off the remainder of her nursing school tuition in a single wire transfer. She became Dominic's shadow, his hands, and increasingly his only confidant. Their days were a battlefield of wills. Nia refused to let him languish in the dark. She threw open the heavy velvet curtains every morning, flooding the master suite with sunlight, much to his initial fury. She brought in Dr. William Stanford, the notoriously brilliant head of neurology at Rush University Medical Center, demanding a revised physical therapy regimen. When Dominic complained of the agonizing nerve pain during his passive range of motion exercises, Nia didn't coddle him. She held his gaze, her warm, rich brown hands firmly manipulating his atrophied muscles. "Pain means the nerves are firing, Dominic," she would say, her voice a soothing but firm anchor in his storm. "It means you're still in there. Push back." And slowly, miraculously, he did. Because of the incomplete nature of his C4 injury, the swelling in his spinal cord began to recede. It started as a phantom sensation, a prickle of heat in his right shoulder. Then, late one evening while Nia was reading her textbooks aloud to him, his right index finger twitched. It was a microscopic movement invisible to anyone but him, but it was enough. The king was waking up. However, they kept this microscopic victory a fiercely guarded secret. Dominic's survival instincts were sharper than ever, and he knew the walls of his own home were poisoned. The chemistry between them, meanwhile, evolved into something deeply consuming. In the quiet, vulnerable hours of the night, stripped of his fearsome Mafia persona, Dominic was just a man. He told her about growing up utterly alone on the unforgiving streets of Chicago, clawing his way to the top of a brutal syndicate because it was the only way to ensure he would never be a victim again. Nia, in turn, shared the heavy burden of her father's gambling debts, the systemic racism she fought against in the medical field, and the exhausting reality of having to be twice as good to get half as far. Dominic looked at her with a reverence bordering on worship. He watched the way the reading lamp illuminated her glowing deep brown skin, tracing the proud, beautiful lines of her profile. She was a queen without a crown. "When I get out of this chair," Dominic promised one night, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that sent a shiver down Nia's spine, "I am going to burn the world down for what they did. And then, I am going to give you everything left over." Nia paused, her hand gently resting on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I don't want the world, Dominic. I just want you whole." But the underworld wouldn't wait for his recovery. The tension in the penthouse was approaching a boiling point. Victor Rossi was growing impatient. With Dominic isolated, Victor was bleeding the syndicate's accounts dry, making reckless deals with the O'Connor crime family on the south side. The men guarding the doors were no longer Dominic's loyalists. They had slowly been replaced by Victor's personal thugs. The breaking point arrived on a freezing Tuesday night. Nia had slipped out of the master suite to fetch Dominic's evening medications from the locked medical cabinet in the West Wing. As she rounded the corner near the library, she heard hushed, urgent voices. She pressed her back against the cool marble wall, holding her breath. It was Victor speaking with Officer Dennis Gallagher, a famously corrupt vice detective on the CPD payroll. "The boss is lingering," Victor hissed, pacing the Persian rug. "The capos are getting restless. If he doesn't die soon, they're going to demand a sit-down, and I don't have the backing of the older bosses yet." "Then, stop waiting for nature to take its course," Gallagher replied callously. He pulled a small, unmarked glass vial from his coat pocket and set it on the mahogany desk. "Potassium chloride, concentrated. You slip this into his IV line or his evening drink. It causes sudden cardiac arrest. Completely untraceable in a standard autopsy, especially for a man in his compromised medical state. He'll just look like another tragic statistic." Nia's blood ran ice cold. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. Victor wasn't just usurping the throne. He was the architect of the Lower Wacker Drive ambush, and now he was finishing the job. The nurse, Victor muttered darkly. Nia. She monitors everything he ingests. She's too sharp. So handle her, Victor. You're a mob boss act like one. Gallagher sneered. A tragic home invasion. The maid's daughter gets caught in the crossfire. It rights itself. Nia didn't wait to hear another word. She silently retreated, sprinting back to the master suite on the balls of her feet. She locked the heavy oak doors behind her, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at Dominic. Nia! Dominic's brow furrowed instantly, sensing the panic radiating from her. What happened? It's Victor, she gasped, rushing to his side. She quickly relayed everything she had overheard: the potassium chloride, the corrupt cop, the plan to stage a home invasion to murder them both. Dominic, we have to call the police. The real police. Or the FBI. We have to get you out of here right now. Dominic didn't panic. The fear that gripped Nia did not touch him. Instead, a chilling, terrifying calm washed over his features. His dark eyes hardened into obsidian. The broken, paralyzed man vanished, replaced entirely by the ruthless, calculating apex predator who had conquered Chicago. No police, Dominic said, his voice dangerously soft. If we run, we are dead by morning. We don't run, Nia. We set a trap. The air in the penthouse was thick with impending violence the following evening. Nia moved through her duties with practiced precision, though her nerves were vibrating like struck tuning forks. She had sent her mother Brenda away to a hotel under the guise of an all-expenses-paid spa weekend. It was just Nia and Dominic in the Viper's Nest. Following Dominic's meticulous instructions, Nia had spent the morning covertly using a burner phone to contact Leo Dempsey, Dominic's most fiercely loyal enforcer, a man who had been banished to the docks by Victor weeks ago. At 9 p.m., the heavy doors to the master suite clicked open. Victor stepped inside, holding a silver tray with a glass of water and Dominic's nighttime pills. His face was a mask of feigned concern, but his eyes glittered with lethal intent. Nia, why don't you take a break? Victor suggested, smoothly setting the tray down. You've been working so hard. I can give the boss his meds tonight. Nia, sitting by the window, looked up from her textbook. She channeled every ounce of composure she had developed in the ER. I'm fine, Victor. It's my job. I insist. Victor's voice dropped an octave, the threat no longer veiled. He reached into his tailored jacket, his hand resting ominously over the bulge of his shoulder holster. Go to your room, Nia. Dominic slouched in his chair, let out a raspy, weak cough. Let him, Nia. Let my loyal underboss serve me. Nia hesitated, acting out the perfect picture of reluctance, before standing up and slowly walking toward the door. But she didn't leave. She stopped near the entryway, hovering in the shadows. Victor turned his back to the door, pulling the small vial of potassium chloride from his pocket. He uncapped it with his thumb, pouring the clear liquid into the glass of water. He stirred it, a sick smile spreading across his face as he turned to his paralyzed boss. Drink up, Dominic, Victor said, holding the glass to Dominic's lips. It's time to sleep. You've fought long enough. The family needs a strong leader, not a cripple in a chair. You always were impatient, Victor, Dominic whispered, not breaking eye contact. And you were always arrogant, Victor sneered, tilting the glass closer. Nia, now, Dominic commanded, his voice suddenly ringing out with terrifying strength. Before Victor could react, Nia lunged forward from the shadows. She didn't go for the glass. She grabbed the heavy brass table lamp and swung it with all her might, cracking it violently across the back of Victor's skull. Victor roared in pain, dropping the poisoned water as he stumbled forward. He recovered quickly, a vicious snarl twisting his bloody features. He reached for his gun, aiming it squarely at Nia's chest. You stupid bitch, you're dead. Click. Victor froze. The sound of a hammer pulling back echoed loudly in the quiet room. Victor slowly lowered his gaze to Dominic's lap. Dominic's right arm, the arm that was supposed to be completely paralyzed, was raised. It was shaking violently, the muscles screaming under the immense, agonizing strain. But his grip was locked tightly around a suppressed Glock 19, that Nia had tucked beneath his blanket an hour prior. Dominic's finger was firmly on the trigger, aimed directly at Victor's stomach. "You missed a spot on lower whacker Victor." Dominic said, a bloody victorious smile gracing his lips. Before Victor could raise his weapon, the suite doors exploded open. Leo Dempsey and half a dozen heavily armed loyalists stormed into the room. They had bypassed Victor's men in the lobby using the private service elevator Nia had unlocked for them. In seconds, Victor was disarmed, forced to his knees, and staring down the barrels of 6 assault rifles. "Take him to the warehouse." Dominic ordered, his arm finally dropping back to his lap, exhausted but triumphant. "Make sure he understands exactly what happens to traitors before he stops breathing." As Victor was dragged screaming from the room, the deafening silence returned. Leo gave Dominic a respectful bow, a silent vow of restored loyalty, before shutting the door, leaving the king and his queen alone. Nia collapsed into the chair next to Dominic, her hands shaking violently now that the adrenaline was fading. She looked at him, tears of relief finally welling in her eyes. Dominic slowly turned his head toward her. With agonizing effort, he lifted his right hand again, reaching out across the small space between them. Nia caught his hand, lacing her fingers through his, pressing his warm palm against her tear-stained cheek. "You saved my life," he whispered fiercely. "We saved each other," she corrected, kissing his knuckles. 1 year later, the sun was setting brilliantly over Lake Michigan, casting a golden glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Astor Street penthouse. Dominic Kang stood by the glass. He was leaning heavily on a custom titanium cane, his right leg braced, but he was standing, tall, imposing, and undeniably powerful. The Mafia empire had been quietly dismantled, restructured into a massive legitimate real estate conglomerate. He had traded blood money for a future he could actually live in. The doors opened, and Nia walked in, dropping her heavy medical bag onto the sofa. She was no longer just a student. She was a licensed trauma nurse, her beautiful brown face glowing with exhaustion and deep, abiding happiness. Dominic turned, the hard lines of his face softening instantly. He walked slowly toward her, wrapping his good arm around her waist and pulling her flush against his chest. "Tough shift," he murmured, burying his face in her dark curls. "The toughest," Nia smiled, leaning into his strength, a strength she had helped rebuild from nothing. "But coming home makes it worth it." He kissed her, a deep, consuming promise of the life they had fought so hard to secure. The king had his empire back, but he knew the absolute truth without the woman in his arms. He was nothing but a ghost in a chair. If you loved this story of power betrayal and unbreakable love, smash that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love a good mafia romance drama, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping, heart-stopping stories every single week. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought of Nia's brave move. We love reading your reactions.